There was this myth of the mound builders, that
Hmm.
there were these good white people that were destroyed by the savages. That was the mythology. He clarified that. He said that's not what the Book of Mormon says.
Welcome, everybody, for this week's podcast. And we are doing this is number 24, and this is the Doctrine and Covenants, section 63. And you probably recognize on the screen here we have Jonathan Neville, our resident
Right?
historian, and he's going to provide some context and so forth for this. Again, we just want to mention that we're going to just cover some insights and things into this week's information in regard to section 63. So, Jonathan, why don't you take it away with a little bit of insights as to what is happening at this point in time when this revelation was received by Joseph?
Okay, that's a good idea. Good to see you, Rod, and everybody else. I'm going to share the screen here because I put some of this on a PowerPoint. So you can see that all right, can you?
Yep.
Okay, so this is the lesson for this week is Doctrine and Covenants 63, just the one section. And it's there's a lot packed in here, so we're going to try to go through it as quickly as we can. Okay, the first thing I want to point out is the locations here. The last few weeks, we've been looking at revelations given in Missouri. So you can see on the map here that now we're back in Kirtland. And this is Joseph left Missouri on August 9th, arrived in Kirtland on August 27th. And there's an interesting description of their trip in the church history. And this is dated August of 1831. You can see the handwritten part of it there with the link at the bottom from the Joseph Smith papers. But I'll just read what this says because it's kind of interesting. He says, after this little meeting with the elders, myself and Sidney Rigdon and Oliver Cowdery continued our journey by land to St. Louis. Now, if you remember, they left Missouri, or they left the Independence area in canoes. And they went down the river, and the river was dangerous, and all those revelations that we talked about last week. But here, they continued their journey by land to St. Louis, where we overtook brothers W. Phelps and Sidney Gilbert. From this place, we took stage. In other words, Joseph, Sidney, and Oliver Cowdery took the stagecoach, and Phelps and Gilbert went by water all the way to Kirtland, and where we arrived safe and well on the 27th. This next part is very interesting. He says, many things transpired upon this journey to strengthen our faith, and which displayed the goodness of God in such a marvelous manner, that we could not help beholding the exertions of Satan to blind the eyes of the people, so as to hide the true light that lights every man that comes into the world. That's interesting because it's kind of a paraphrase of the scripture. But what could have transpired on this journey that would strengthen their faith? Let's look again at the map here. You can see the red lines show roughly where the stagecoach went. So they crossed Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio over land. And those of you who watched this video, most of you are familiar with the letter that Joseph Smith wrote a few years later to Emma when he described this area as the plains of the Nephites. And they were passing these earthworks and the mounds of the ancient people that lived there that he said were left by the Nephites. And so that's one of the things where he said it strengthened their faith was just traveling over this Book of Mormon land that he identified. When they got to Kirtland, this is an old photograph of what Kirtland looked like when the temple was there. So this was obviously a few years later. But this is the area now where you see the recreation of the Kirtland town that the Saints built, the New OK Whitney store and the other things. It was in this little flat area that you can see in this picture. So that gives us a feel for what it looked like back then. Then the introduction to the Revelation continues with the history, the part that we just read after they arrived. And then Joseph's history says this: in these infant days of the church, there was a great anxiety to obtain the word of the Lord upon every subject that in any way concerned our salvation. You can imagine back then that everybody wanted to know what's going to happen in the future, what are we supposed to do, and they had questions about what the Bible taught and so on. And then he said, and as the land of Zion was now the most important temporal object in view, I inquired of the Lord for further information upon the gathering of the saints and the purchase of the land and other matters. So that's what this section 63 focuses on. We're going to be talking about that a little bit. In the manual, I wanted to point out one thing. The manual refers to this article about Ezra Booth and Isaac Morley. There's a link in the manual to this that you should all read because it gives you some background and the difference between Ezra Booth and Isaac Morley. They both had joined the church. They were both very enthusiastic when they went out to Missouri, but Ezra Booth was disappointed. It didn't meet his expectations, whereas Isaac Morley remained faithful. And you can read that whole story in there. But I wanted to point out two things here. As you read this article, look at how they framed this. It says, ever since they had first read the Book of Mormon, believers had wondered how, where, and when the book's prophecies would be realized. When would the Lamanites, then believed to be the North American Indians, be converted and join church members in building a new Jerusalem in the Americas? I highlighted that because this is the same issue we have with these historians who reject what the revelations, because section 28, 30, and 32 specifically identified these Indians as the Lamanites.
Exactly.
But they try to frame this as back then, church members believed these North American Indians were the Lamanites, but we don't believe that anymore is the implication.
Yeah, exactly. They're casting doubt on the North American Indians being the Lamanites.
Yeah. And see, then later on it says these early members knew the site for the city would be among the Lamanites. Well, apparently the historians don't believe they were really the Lamanites.
Right.
And then it points out they had even dispatched Oliver Cowdery and 3 other missionaries to the far western reaches of the United States to preach to American Indians near Missouri. But that's not what the Revelation said. The Revelation doesn't say, go preach to the American Indians, which was a common phrase they could have used. It says, go preach to the Lamanites specifically.
Right, but
anybody can read those revelations.
But apparently whoever was writing this, which is probably the church historical, the church history people, they decided to change the Lord's words in these revelations from Lamanites to American Indians.
Yeah,
and again, the only reason for doing that would be to try to say, well, the Mayans really were the people down in Central America, and they're not the American Indians. But they were the Lamanites down there, but not up here. Yeah. So they apparently, it makes me a little bit wonder, when you change the word that the Lord uses repeatedly in these revelations.
Well, and the real problem is we can always interpret the scriptures to mean whatever we want. We confirm our biases that way all the time, right?
Right.
And so we want to be careful, and we're going to see in this revelation that the Lord cautioned against this very thing. When he said, you have to trust my words, right? and yet right here, we're seeing in the link to this article, and it's an awesome article. I recommend everybody read it. But as you read these things that the current church historians are putting out, you have to recognize they have a very strong bias, and that they're reaffirming over and over. And that is that they think that the early saints were naive, they were misled, they were making assumptions about things, but it was just Joseph Smith dictating the words of the Lord. It wasn't Joseph Smith's idea that they were Lamanites. How would he have known, right?
Well, it basically says that either Joseph Smith or the Lord didn't know what they were talking about when they used the term Lamanites as relating to these native peoples here in North America, because either the Lord got it wrong or Joseph Smith got it wrong. But either way, it doesn't bode well for people when they read this and go, well, who was wrong? Was it the Lord? Well, probably not. So it must have been Joseph Smith that was wrong. And the historians apparently must know more than Joseph Smith did, because he was just, an unlearned, country boy.
Yeah. Well, the other aspect of it, let me share that screen again here. The other aspect of it that I think is kind of funny is it says, then believed to be North American Indians. The reality is there's a lot of Latter-day Saints today that still believe what the scripture said.
Yeah.
So it isn't just then believed, like nobody believes it anymore. Yeah. There's a lot of us that still believe it.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly.
Okay. Anyway, the point of the Ezra Booth and Isaac Morley story is that they they started off at the same point and then they diverged. And so I have this little kind of aphorism on here, I guess. The happiness is when reality exceeds expectations, and disappointment is when your expectations exceed reality.
Yeah.
So for Ezra Booth, he was expecting to walk into a Zion situation in Missouri that was going to be wonderful, prosperous, and everything else. Whereas Isaac Morley walked into it realizing that the Lord had asked them to build Zion, not just to go and occupy Zion. That was already prepared. And that's the situation we're all in today, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times in the church, sometimes we have expectations that are unrealistic because the Lord is asking us to build Zion ourselves. He's not wanting someone else to do it. We can just walk in and benefit from it, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the situation that we find ourselves in to this very day, that sometimes our expectations exceed reality, and we have to work to make reality exceed our expectations. Yeah. So that's kind of the point of that.
Yeah. So much of life actually has to do with our particular viewpoints about it. You know, our perceptions, you know, create our realities. And and so when you have an incorrect perception, or you know, perception that isn't like you said, you know, what you expected, then that does lead to disappointment. So a lot of times it's just a matter of just correcting our perspective, you know.
Yeah, that's right.
And it completely changes our whole mindset, and whether we're happy or upset or angry or whatever.
Yeah, totally.
It changes your perception.
Yeah. And these sections in the Doctrine and Covenants where they talk about these two men and how they responded are just a kind of a metaphor or a type of every one of us. Yeah. That we can all decide if we want to make our reality exceed our expectations, or if we want to sit back and be angry that reality is below our expectations. Yeah. So that's an underlying theme for these several weeks in Come Follow Me, where we talk about these sections and how to establish Zion. Back then, they were focused on how are we going to purchase the land, how are we going to move out there, and so forth. Today, we're trying to decide for each one of us individually, what are we doing to establish Zion? Exactly. That's why I have my blog, How to Zion. We've talked about that before, but every week I post something in there about how to establish Zion ourselves in our day.
Yeah.
So that's an exciting part of this whole process. Okay, let's go back to the screen one more time, because I want to focus on this verse 1 and 2 in here. It said, "Hearken, O ye people, and open your hearts, and give ear from afar, and listen, you that call yourselves the people of the Lord, and hear the word of the Lord and his will concerning you. Yea, and verily I say, I hear the word of him whose anger is kindled against the wicked and rebellious." Well, I bring this up because of two reasons. One, do we call ourselves the people of the Lord? We call ourselves Latter-day Saints, right? That's calling ourselves the people of the Lord.
Well, we're supposed to call ourselves now not Latter-day Saints.
Well, we're still members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Exactly. We're still Latter-day Saints, right?
Yeah.
So I found this interesting because many of you know that I'm planning to release a book soon about Joseph Smith and Jonathan Edwards, the great minister from the 1700s. Well, he gave a sermon and talked about a very similar concept here. I'm just going to read through it so you can kind of see how this kind of laid a precedent for what Joseph Smith expressed. Edwards said, "There are a great many here present that do make an explicit profession of an experience of grace," in other words, a spiritual experience, "profess to find themselves evidences of being true and sincere friends of God. In them it will be especially aggravated and especially dangerous if they refuse to follow him. You that call yourselves true saints, if your practice is such as not to help forward this great work, you hinder vastly more than others. Dull, sleepy, and carnal saints are special clogs to the work." So I thought that was kind of interesting in light of President Nelson talking about lazy learners last conference. Mm-hmm. You know, this is kind of what they're getting at here is, if we call ourselves saints, and the Doctrine and Covenants says, "Call yourselves the people of the Lord." Jonathan Edwards was talking about, you that call yourselves true saints. It's the same idea. Yeah. If you call yourself saints, you need to live up to it.
Again, I like the analogy basically of looking inward versus looking outward. If your main goal in studying the gospel and having the priesthood and doing all these things and establishing Zion is to save yourself, then you've got the whole wrong reason. It's not about just saving yourself; it's about helping others and
That's
doing
right.
the work. And
Yeah.
and that's brought out there too. Awesome.
Okay, so you want to talk about a few things before we get to verse 22, I think, didn't you?
Yeah, just a couple of verses here, and let me go here just for a second to this screen here. And this is in section 63 again, so we can scroll down here to verse 8. Right here. The very I say unto you that there are those among you who seek signs, and there have been much, and there have been such even from the beginning. So there have been people who are seeking signs even from the beginning. He's going to give us a really good information about seeking signs here. But behold, faith cometh not by signs, but signs follow those that believe or have faith. Yea, signs come by faith, not by the will of man, nor as they please, but by the will of God. And then verse 11, yea, signs come by faith unto mighty works, for without faith no man pleaseth God, and with whom God is angry, he is not well pleased. Wherefore, unto such he showeth no signs, only in wrath unto their condemnation. So I wanted to have a little bit of a discussion about this, the seeking of signs. And again, it goes back to this idea, why would people seek for signs? Because I'm going to jump out of this here for a second, stop the share there. So we are not to, well, first off, we're supposed to be looking for the signs that God has promised, for example, of the second coming. He said that there will be signs, and that those who are watching for the signs will recognize them. And yet, it's kind of seems like a confrontation or kind of thing here, really, where you have a commandment to seek for signs, but then here we have this other thing basically saying that you're not really supposed to seek for signs. Why is that this dichotomy here that seems to be going on here? And I wanted to kind of just jump into that for just a second.
Well, I think two things about it. First off, faith is a choice, and so people that seek signs as evidence or proof aren't making a choice, right? And so the whole idea of faith is to exercise your agency to choose to believe a certain thing. But at the same time, your faith can be confirmed by signs. And that's what you just brought up.
Right.
Is that when you have faith, then you perceive it through the gifts of healing and various spiritual gifts and spiritual confirmations of things, right?
Well, you have people like Korihor basically said, show me a sign, Alma, and then I'll believe. Right. That's not how it works, folks. The fact of the matter is that when you are seeking for a sign in order to believe, then that shows no faith. But when you are showing your faith by believing, then the signs will come. You'll start to understand and recognize the signs because, and he gives us the key here. He says that he gives no information. He says unto such he showeth no signs for those who don't have faith. In other words, if you don't have faith, then you're not going to be able to recognize the signs because he's not going to inspire your mind to be able to realize when these signs are happening or what these signs are.
See it. Another aspect of this that I see it is when it says, "He that seeketh signs shall see signs." That's what you were referring to. Mm-hmm. That's basically a definition of confirmation bias, right? Seeking ye shall find works no matter what you're seeking for. If you're seeking, and I think President Nelson's talked about that too, where if you're seeking for reasons to reject the gospel, you can find those.
Yeah.
If you're seeking for reasons to accept the gospel, you'll find those. So it's
kind of what you're looking for, and all of us have had the experience of like we get a new car. And a different car, and all of a sudden we realize, wow, there's a lot of these on the road. I never even realized before that there was so many of these. Right. Because you weren't looking for it before. But when you finally focus on that, then all of a sudden it starts to come into focus. You realize, there's quite a few of these, pacers out there. Just kidding.
You got a pacer, nice. would be.
Probably worth some money today, maybe, if you can find one. I don't know,
So.
but anyway. Yeah, and those of you who don't know what a pacer is, it was this ugly bubble-like looking car that was, anyway, it was a long time ago, so that kind of tells you our age.
Yeah, you can look it up. You can Google that
Yes,
one.
exactly.
But the point is, I mean, the Lord says right here, he that seeketh signs shall see signs, but not unto salvation.
Yeah, yep.
So you just find what you're looking for. If you're seeking to establish Zion, if you want to live in a Zion society, if you want to become like God, if you want to live in harmony with other people, you can do all those things.
Yeah.
But if you don't, if you want to, let's say there's a lot of people that seek out contention, for example, in our society especially.
Oh, yeah.
They're always trying to find fault with other people, and they're always trying to generate controversy and so forth. Those kind of people find what they want. So it just depends on what you're looking for.
Yeah, it's people that seem to be surrounded by drama, in their lives, no matter what it is. It seems like they're attracted to the drama, and they create the drama, and they're always living in this state of drama all the time, and they need some Dramamine.
Well, yeah. Well, since most of our watchers here, our viewers, are heartland oriented, right? Mm-hmm. It's a perfect example, because if you accept the teachings of the prophets and you seek to corroborate and confirm those teachings, there's tons of evidence for it.
Yeah.
But if your orientation is that you reject what the prophets have taught and you prefer what the scholars have taught, you can confirm that bias too. I mean, it's a simple choice. Yeah. And we see that over and over and over. I blog about that a lot. You've talked about it a lot, because once you get the idea that maybe the prophets were correct in the first place about the Native Americans being Lamanites, or the Ilkmore in New York, and these translation by the Urim and Thummim, those kind of things, there's tons of evidence to support it.
Yeah.
And so you make your decision of what you want in life, and you can find signs to support that, like it just said here. Yeah. But as it points out too, as you said, faith does not come from signs. The signs follow those that believe. Yeah. And those who believe the teachings of the prophets find this corroboration for those teachings. Those who don't believe the teachings of the prophets find corroboration for not believing the prophets. It's very simple.
Yeah, that's really an excellent point. I'd like to apply that a little bit to those who are looking towards the second coming. There are those who seeking we want to see the signs. What are the signs in the heavens? What are the signs in the earth, and so forth? And they run to and fro, looking for the signs, and for the purpose of saving themselves. What do we need to do to save ourselves? And the best way you can save yourself is to help to warn others to basically to repent, to come to Christ, to return back to the gospel, to stay faithful. And that's really the best thing that we can do to prepare for the second coming. Are we going to be ready to see and embrace him when he comes? Yeah. And that also is in verse 12. It basically says kind of the same thing again. He says, "I'm not pleased with those among you who have sought after signs and wonders for faith, and not for the good of men, unto my glory." So to bring people back to God is basically really what these signs and so forth are for. So as far as second coming kind of stuff, so what are you supposed to do? You're not supposed to look for the signs?
Yeah.
and I think the answer...
You and I have talked about this before, because my whole life I've been hearing all these people predicting the end times,
Yes, yeah.
And I feel like, okay, they're in the scriptures, but the scriptures are very clear. No one knows when it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So if you don't know when it's going to happen, why worry about it? Why try to predict it?
Yeah.
And so my whole attitude towards the thing is, I'm going to do my best to live the gospel, help to build Zion, because that's something I can have control over. What am I doing to make a difference in that direction? What kind of a society do I want to live in? How many people can I help in whatever way I can help? That's my focus.
Yeah.
The last thing I'm worried about is what does it mean when it says the moon's going to turn to blood? I mean, I don't know. And there's so many, I've read so many interpretations of that, people convinced of what it means and so on. Well, you can believe whatever you want as far as I'm concerned. I don't care because it doesn't affect me. It doesn't affect people around me. It doesn't affect our society.
Yeah. I think that it is important for us to be. I mean, in fact, there's some commandments basically to those who are looking for the signs that the Lord has promised will be given. His coming will not take them like a thief in the night, which is, I think, is an important thing. But again, I think that the main point of that whole thing is to bless others, to help others to find Christ and to be there, because the time is at hand when the day of repentance is over. The night cometh, kind of thing,
Yeah.
And so to try to help everybody to prepare to see that time. And obviously, I've had the same thing as you, Jonathan. I mean, my whole life it's been kind of like, we need to have our food storage and have this and so forth so that we can prepare. And my parents had, we had a boatload of wheat in our basement, which we ended up mostly feeding to pigs and so forth, because it just gets old after 30 years or whatever. But I still feel like having that food storage and so forth is a commandment that we should be doing, and so I still do that kind of thing. But I've come to a realization that it's not just to save myself and my family, but also to be a blessing to other people who may need it and their time of need. So, Well,
the other aspect of it, I guess, is when you're aware of the signs, then you can understand what the Lord meant when He says, "Let not your heart be troubled."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to worry about all the crazy things going on. The Lord has a plan and it'll be fulfilled, and as long as we do our part, we're fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
but we do have to do our part
over in this revelation too. Huh?
But we do have to do our part. Now you want to talk about 23, correct?
Yeah.
Verse 23?
Actually 22 and 23.
Okay.
So let me flip over to that so that we can see it.
Okay.
On here. So this is section 63, verse 22, and we'll just read it real quickly. It says, "Now verily I say unto you that as I said that I would make known my will unto you, behold, I will make it known unto you, not by the way of commandment, for there are many who observe not to keep my commandments, but unto him that keepeth my commandments, I will give the mysteries of my kingdom. And the same shall be in him a well of living water, springing up to everlasting life." When I read that, it reminded me of Alma 12:9. It's kind of the rule of Alma 12:9, I call it. And so let's just look at Alma 12:9. We don't, well, I might as well read it, I guess. Some people can't have you listening to this. Yeah. Okay, so Alma 12:9. "And now Alma began to expound these things unto him, saying, It is given unto many to know the mysteries of God." See, the same thing in DNC, it said the mysteries of my kingdom. But Alma said to know the mysteries of God. Nevertheless, they are laid under a strict command that they shall not impart only according to the portion of his word which he doth grant unto the children of men, according to the heed and diligence which they give unto him. And therefore he that will harden his heart, the same receiveth the lesser portion of the word. And he that will not harden his heart, to him is given the greater portion of the word, until it is given unto him to know the mysteries of God, until he know them in full," which is essentially what verse 23 said. He that keepeth the commandments, the Lord says, "I will give the mysteries of the kingdom," and it will become a well of living water. Back to Alma in verse 11, he says, "And they that will harden their hearts, to them is given the lesser portion of the word, until they know nothing concerning his mysteries." Now, I've talked about this before, and we can relate this. I hate to keep coming back to the Heartland material, but it's a good example of this, because the Oliver Cowdery and succeeding prophets told us clearly where Cumorah was, for example. Mm-hmm. And the people who reject that are in this massive confusion about where is Cumorah. There's expeditions going on down to Central America. They've been going on for 20-something years. These people are running around looking for Cumorah.
They found about 4 or 5 of them now, and in fact, there was an article written by anti-Mormons saying 1 Cumorah, 2 Cumorah, 3 Cumorah, 4. How many more?
Yeah, exactly. And they're all over the place, Yeah. And so I think, okay, so most of those people don't even know that Oliver Cowdery and the other brethren specified that Cumorah was right in New York. It's been there all along.
Yeah.
And that's what happens when you reject what the prophets have taught. Pretty soon you don't even know anything about it, about the topic.
And it looks really bad because the more you speculate, then the more other people speculate. And since there's no foundation upon which to build, you can speculate about all kinds of stuff. Even the Book of Mormon happened in Malaysia, or in you can make almost any kind of a geography work if you're willing to just bend enough of the statements and the rules.
Yeah, well, it gets back to what we said earlier, that you can interpret the scriptures however you want to confirm your bias, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why if you don't start with what the prophets have taught, you reject what the prophets have taught, and you're just drifting around with your own ideas to and fro, as the New Testament says, then you've forgotten everything that the prophets did teach. And just in the principle of Amma 12:9, the more faithful you are, the more you learn. Right. The more you harden your heart against what the prophets teach, the less you know. And that's what we're seeing in many
and ends up with today. More and more questions and less answers and more speculations and things like that. When I would call that the lesser portion of the word. I mean, trying to make the Mayan civilization, for example, fit the descriptions of the Book of Mormon is an impossible task, but yet there's some who just will do that. But it's so simple. I think that's one of the things that you and I both really love, and hopefully as our listeners and the people who are watching the podcast realize that it's really simple. The truth is simple. The simple truth is the truth is simple.
And unbelievably simple.
And you don't have to sit there and bend all the, try to make north, south, and east, west, and so forth, and and change the cardinal directions, and then try to say, well, when they say sheep, they really meant a rat, and when they say Lamanites, they really meant American Indians. I mean, you have to constantly change, and you're just twisting in the wind. It's kind of like a political spin in a lot of ways. You can see something and you can spin it one way or the other to try to influence people in different ways. But that's the thing I find with the Lord. If you just follow what He says and what the Book of Mormon says, then you don't have to twist and spin and do all these other kinds of contortions to try to make it work.
That's right. Yeah, and we keep harping on the Hill Cumorah in New York, but it's really, that's just sort of, it's not really a metaphor, it's a reality, but it's an example of the difference between accepting what the Lord taught and just going with it. Mm-hmm. And it applies to all this. Section 63 talks about various commandments that people were not keeping, right? Yeah. And some people have a hard time accepting what the Lord taught, so they try to find an exception here or there, or they try to skirt it, or they just don't keep the commandments because they don't think the promises will be fulfilled, and so on. It's so much easier to take what the Lord said, accept it, and then additional information is given to you. And it spells it right out in Alma 12:9, but also here in this section of the Doctrine and Covenants. Yeah. Okay, so the next part.
Before we jump on there, just let me go for just a second to this here. And talking in the same verse 23, talking about a well of living water springing up unto everlasting life. And this well of living water, I find it just interesting. Living water. Water is the prime element of life. I mean, there is no such thing as any form of life that doesn't have water in its system involved. And so water is essential to life. And what they're talking about here as far as a well of living water is an interesting aspect as well, because according to the Hebrews, stagnant water was not a good thing. Right. So you wouldn't baptize anybody, for example, in a lake, in a stagnant lake. Christ went to the river Jordan because it was flowing, living, moving water. In other words, I think to a large extent, that's kind of like us in our lives. Are we stagnant? Are we moving?
Yeah, good point.
Even if we're still water, it can still be pure water. Like, for example, the Sea of Galilee is pure water, but Christ didn't go there to get baptized. Even though it's still water, it's still pure water. And I mean, it's a beautiful lake. I mean, I've swam in it. We've swam in it before and so forth. But it's not
Well, then it's
really.
not pure anymore. Wait a minute. If you swam in it.
Well, I didn't say how pure. but anyway, and actually, if you go to the River Jordan, I mean, that's this muddy river,
Yeah.
so it's
That's
not
right.
pure, but it's living water. It's flowing. In other words, it has to be, I think this is the analogy, it has to be going somewhere.
Yeah.
It has to be not staying put where they're at. It has to be moving forward. And if you do that, then it will spring up unto everlasting life. So I think that's an analogy for our lives as we think of this living water, and in our lives, if we are moving and pushing forward and so forth, then it will ultimately be to our advantage in the next life after this.
Yeah.
And that's so keeping the commandments is kind of the prerequisite to being able to do that and to keep that movement forward going. And I just wanted to make the little point about that.
Another way I look at it is when it's springing up, that's energy, right? It's continuous flow of information.
Yes.
And that's how the gospel works. I mean, there's the basic principles you start with, but the more you learn, and it just keeps going and going and going to the point where you can't even remember how you could have possibly been so ignorant in the past. And you see a lot of these squabbles online about doctrine or history or whatever.
Yeah.
You think, how could they possibly be worrying about those issues? That's such a low level of consciousness, really.
Yeah.
And there's a much higher level of consciousness that you get into when you have this well of living water springing up into eternal life. It's just a whole different level of energy and understanding and consciousness.
That's another one of life's great dichotomies, and that is the more you know, the more you realize how little we know.
Well, that's true too. But at least you have a better understanding of that one area.
Yes.
And it continues to come. You never learn everything there is to know. So.
Right. Yep. All right. So verse 24. Did you want to go into verse 24 at all? Then
I didn't have anything about 24.
It's just basically talking about the land of Zion. It says the Lord is saying that this is my will of the Lord your God concerning his saints, that they should assemble themselves together unto the land of Zion, but not in haste, lest there should be confusion, which bringeth pestilence. So I said, behold, the land of Zion, verse 25, I, the Lord, hold it in mine own hands. So this land of Zion, I know that there's some confusion to some extent, about Zion as far as what it is and what it means and so forth. But there's a part here. I want to see if we can go to this. Let me go to the screen again here. I just clicked on this Zion part here. Let's see. It's going Zion in the topical guide here. So if we go to the topical guide, then it has several definitions of Zion here. Okay, called "Set my king upon the land of holy Zion." Let's see. God will save Zion, his dwelling place in Zion, and so forth. If we go to let's see. Okay. Zion shall be purchased. Let's see. I'm trying to find the right spot here. But anyway, it talks about Zion will be built upon the American continent here. Okay. There's a Zion that is kind of the more esoteric understanding, which is the Zion meaning the pure in heart. But there's also this physical place of Zion, an actual city, like Enoch built his city, and it was called Zion.
The New Jerusalem.
The New Jerusalem is called Zion. So there's a specific thing. So some people get that conflated a little bit as to what Zion means. And anyway, so there's some other aspects of that Joseph Smith was talking about with this Zion, but it's pretty clear that Zion here is talking about North America, and specifically around the land of Missouri is the Zion that they're talking about here. And then if we go back, a couple of, let's see, not that far back. Okay. Okay. Um, let's see. Then what we end up having is that in the later verses here, it says that you're supposed to purchase the land of Zion. Okay, which is in verse 27. It says, "Wherefore I, the Lord, will that you should purchase the land of Zion." I wanted to talk about that a little bit. So the saints had been, using their resources and so forth to build Kirtland, which I think originally they thought that was the gathering place for the saints, right? And so
Right.
they were doing that. They built the temple and things there. And then the Lord's basically saying, no, this isn't really Zion. The Zion I'm talking about is further west, okay,
Yeah. Right.
over here in Missouri. And you can go out there and kind of just take over the lands, but maybe we could just address that a little bit. The purchasing versus, they said, if you don't purchase it, then you have to do it by blood. And we talked about this just before we started recording the podcast. That for example, when the King of France or the King of Britain or whatever, when they came over, they just kind of claimed the land, right? So,
Right.
And the only way that doesn't hold is if somebody challenges the claim, in which case they basically would go to war. So
Right.
who owns the land? Well, let's determine that by who wins the war.
Yeah. Well, in verse 30 and 31 here, it says, if you do it by purchasing it, then you're blessed.
Mm-hmm.
If you try it by blood, since you're forbidden to shed blood, your enemies are upon you. You'll be scourged from city to city, and you'll be few left to stand to receive an inheritance. So, we know the history, which we're going to cover in the next few weeks, and come follow me.
Yeah.
But how does that apply in our lives? Are we trying to do things methodically? Save money, purchase the land, versus just try to fight to seize it.
Yeah. To take
Are
it
there
over.
aspects of our lives that are like that? I think there are, because it said here, as you mentioned, you read that verse about being patient and not in haste, right?
Yeah.
It says, assemble together on the land of Zion, not in haste, lest there be confusion. And that's kind of a situation that I like to look at, this establishing Zion in the broader sense in our day. Everybody wants to live in a Zion society, and they want it to happen overnight. And that's why you have all these politicians trying to figure out how to do it and so on. And there's a lot of confusion all around the world about how to do it. Mm-hmm. The only ones that know how to establish Zion are those who accept the Lord's revelations. But we can't do it fast, because it's been taking us 200 years. We still haven't done it. Yeah. But there's such cool things in place right now to establish Zion in the church. And a lot of it has to do with the self-reliance program, which was an initiative from the first presidency to elevate the lives of all the saints in all aspects of their life, so that they would be able, again, metaphorically speaking, and to purchase the land. In other words, if people can get an education and get good jobs and contribute to society, they'll have the resources to help other people and to establish Zion. And the one I talk about a lot is the emotional resilience, where it talks about the patterns of thinking and how to think more clearly about things and avoid logical thinking errors and so on. This is just a revolutionary program that the church is implementing, and I hope everybody listening is participating in the self-reliance program one way or the other. The other is the whole pathway program, which is phenomenal. It's affecting over 50,000 people right now. And we know about it pretty well. We talked to some, when we were in Madagascar, we spoke to the Pathway students, and my wife's been teaching for Pathway for a long time. And so those are the things that are establishing Zion the way the Lord has set out, even alluded to in this revelation about don't do it in haste, but do it methodically. Take the time to buy the land, take the time to get your education, to get settled in society, and then you can build Zion. That's how I see all this happening.
That's interesting. So after this, then you get to about verse 33, and the Lord kind of changes gears here a little bit in the Revelation. Yeah. And he says, I've sworn in my wrath. This is verse 33. Let me put that up here real quick so we can see that. And so verse 33 says, I have sworn in my wrath and decreed wars upon the face of the earth, and the wicked shall slay the wicked, and fear shall come upon every man. And the saints also shall hardly escape. Nevertheless, I, the Lord, am with them, and will come down in heaven from the presence of my Father, and consume the wicked with unquenchable fire. So when is this happening? They're talking about this. This sounds like when he's going to come down with unquenchable fire. Kind of sounds like second coming kind of stuff to me.
Yeah, it could be. I'm not.
Yeah.
That gets into that era trying to guess when stuff's going to
Yeah,
happen. I don't know. I don't care.
And so so the Lord is talking about his coming back, and this whole section actually is, I think, relating to his second coming. And he says, he decreed wars upon the face of the earth. The wicked shall slay the wicked. I find that interesting. If you take a look at the situation with the first cleansing of the earth was Noah and the flood, and that was the Lord basically taking care of the wicked, because everybody was wicked except for Noah and his family. And then you have the Jaredites, and they basically turn on each other, and they fight an internal war of extermination. And then the Nephites have the same thing, and they fight an internal war of extermination. And the wicked are slaying the wicked. I will never forget the first time I really realized, Moroni's lamenting there at the end of the Book of Mormon. So, you know what, I'm the leader of the armies, but I know that it's hopeless because they will not turn back to God. There's no repenting going on here. They just sleep on their swords and wake up in the morning and fight again. But it's the fighting of the damned, basically, because they know that it's the wicked against the wicked. And that's kind of sounds like what's going to be happening here at the end. And also, I want to give a little warning voice, I guess, if you will, to Latter-day Saints, because I hear so many people say, well, it's going to get bad everywhere else, but it's not going to be that bad like here in Utah or Idaho or Arizona, where they're kind of the strongholds of the church. That's not what it says here.
That's not Zion. Zion's in Oregon. No, you bring that up. That's an interesting point too. I wanted to mention because back in letter 7, when Oliver Cowdery was talking about this, there was this myth of the mound builders, that there were these good white people that were destroyed by the savages. That was the mythology. He clarified that. He said that's not what the Book of Mormon says. The Book of Mormon says it was the wicked destroyed by the wicked. There was no racial difference in them. They were both wicked groups.
They were both from the same family.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a key point, because a lot of the critics say, well, the Book of Mormon is just the mound builder story, and it's exactly not. And Oliver Cowdery was insightful enough to explain that all the way back in letter 7. But moving on to today, you're talking about Utah, Idaho, and Arizona. As well,
Well, it's
awesome,
kind of the main body of the
yeah, that's true.
Church, basically.
But more Latter-day Saints live outside the United States than within the United States today, they say.
Right.
The activity rate, it's not true, but in terms of raw numbers, it is.
Yeah.
But the point is that everywhere where there's a stake of Zion is a refuge for the saints.
Right.
Doesn't matter what country it is, what state it is.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, you're right. There may be a perception in Utah,
but my point is basically that a lot of people feel like it's not going to be so bad here in Utah. It's going to be okay and so forth. And that's not what it says. It says the saints shall hardly escape. So meaning that if you're thinking that you're not going to go through the hard times along with everyone else, I think that you're mistaken. Says
I've heard of people moving to St. Pete County thinking they're going to escape it all.
Well, that's what we're hoping. We're not going to escape. We're actually preparing for people to come there when if the time comes that they can't occupy their towns.
We're really digressing now, but let me mention one thing though, Rod, that we should talk about, and that is it was about 30, 40 years ago when President Romney gave a talk called America's Destiny.
Yeah.
And he prophesied back then, this was in 1975, I think. He said that if we don't change course, we're going to end up the same way the Jaredites and the Nephites did. And if you look at the way our society now has become so well, contentious, but it's
Polarized.
more than contentious. It's people are out there. It's lawlessness in many of the cities. You
Yeah.
see it on YouTube or Twitter, whatever. Every day, there's incidents. I mean, I live not far from Portland, where it's total anarchy in some areas,
Yeah.
and that's exactly the description that we have from the Book of Mormon, where there is bloodshed everywhere. So if you reread that talk that President Romney gave about America's destiny, you can see that we as a society have a choice to make. What is our destiny going to be? Is it going to be what happened in the past, or are we going to move beyond that and to have a more united, productive, beneficial society?
But it sure seems like
And
we're moving in the same direction.
yeah, totally, it does.
You
And
know?
and especially if you look at where we are today versus back in 1975, the difference is stark.
Yeah.
So
It really is. It really is. Okay, so the last thing, then a couple things here, and then we're going to finish up here. Verse 37, lift a warning voice to the world, essentially talking about that. Let me pull
I'm just going to mention something in verse 38 here.
Yeah.
So let me bring that up here on my screen, because I compared this to three verses in this section, 38, 40, and 65. And this is a continuation of some of the lessons from the previous sections of the Doctrine and Covenants, where the Lord says, here's the goal, you guys figure out how to get there. The first one, in verse 38, it says, wherefore let my disciples in Kirtland arrange their temporal concerns to dwell upon this farm. He says, you guys solve your temporal concerns. And then in 40, he says, let all the monies which can be spared, it mattereth not to me whether it be little or much. So it didn't matter how much it was, but whatever you could spare. Mm-hmm. And then the last one in verse 65, let my servants Joseph Smith Jr., Sidney Rigdon, seek them a home as they are taught through prayer by the Spirit. Didn't tell them how to do it. They relied on prayer and being taught by the Spirit. But the point of all three of these, like we saw in the previous revelations, especially 61, 62 in that area, is the Lord says, you guys use your own judgment. Here's where I want you to go. Here's your objective. But you use your own agency, initiative, your talents, your abilities to accomplish that objective. And that's the situation we're all in today. And, some people expect the Lord to tell them how to do every little thing. The Lord's given you the ability to do these things on your own. You have to use your best judgment. It's just, we get back, again, the Cumorah thing is a perfect example. The Lord said, here's what the prophets have taught. You guys figure it out. Yeah. And people are sitting around saying, well, the Lord hasn't told us anything about the Book of Mormon geography. Well, he did. as clear as it can be. Saying it's a fact that this is where this happened is pretty clear. And then from then on, people reject it. So he says, all right, do whatever you want. I'm not going to give you any more because you haven't accepted what I've already told you.
Go off and find Cumorah number 6 or 7.
Yeah. Or this thing with the stone in the hat, Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery were clear about it. People reject that. And so now they're scrambling, trying to sort out, well, what do they really mean? What is, it's a massive confusion unless you stick with what the prophets taught and you go from there. But we can use our own intellect to sort these issues out. Yeah. And we can't expect the Lord to spoon feed everything. And these sections of the Doctrine and Covenants I really like because of how he shows the pattern or the model for here's the objective, here's the basic teaching, you guys figure it out. Yep. So those are a couple of things I wanted to bring up there. And then I think I have another one up here in a minute when you're ready.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, this one is, I should share the screen, I guess. This is back in section 60, same section 63, but verse 64. And it gets back to the Alma idea where he says, remember that which cometh from above is sacred. It must be spoken with care by constraint of the Spirit. And Alma said, it is given unto many to know the mysteries of God, but they are laid under a strict command that they shall not impart, only according to the portion of his word which he doth grant. And so a lot of the things that the Lord has revealed or tells us individually are for our own benefit. It's not for us to teach other people. as if it was doctrine. And that's an important principle to keep in mind as well, that we have, if the Lord trusts us with our own knowledge of the mysteries and so on, that's for us. It's not for us to declare to the world. Then the last one I put up on here, I think was, I think is the next to last verse. Maybe it's the last verse. Where it says in verse 66, these things remain to overcome through patience, that such may receive a more exceeding and eternal weight of glory, otherwise a greater condemnation. And that is an allusion to 2 Corinthians, where he says, for our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. I brought this up because it shows this intertextuality between the Bible and the Doctrine and Covenants in this case, but also in the Book of Mormon and the Pearl of Great Price. There's many, many passages in here where they're intertextual like this. And what's fascinating to me has been to discover there's intertextuality with other things than the Bible. And that's what my next book is going to be talking about. But it's the idea, as I showed earlier, there's an allusion to Jonathan Edwards. Well, there's so much of the scriptures that are intertextual with traditional Christian writings. It's not just from the Bible, as so many people have thought. There's hundreds, actually over 1,000, of non-biblical words and phrases in the Book of Mormon that are intertextual with other Christian authors, particularly Jonathan Edwards. And for me, it's really exciting to see this because it shows how the Latter-day Scriptures really are part of the Christian tradition. And that's what I'm showing more and more. The Book of Mormon is intended for everybody. Elder Christopherson said it's a gift for the entire world. And we want to understand that more and more. And I wanted to give this one example of intertextuality so that listeners here can look for it themselves as they read the scriptures. A lot of the footnotes show intertextuality with passages from the Bible, but it goes far beyond just that. So it's pretty exciting. I keep talking about it because I'm in the middle of editing this book, but it's for me, it's just an exciting new way to understand and open the scriptures to our understanding. So
and I think this is going to be very important for this book to come out to kind of help to understand the role that Joseph Smith played. He wasn't just reading the text off. I mean, he had to engage his mind, his heart, and his whole soul basically in this translation process, and it wasn't just as simple as just reading it off of a rock. But okay, so I wanted to go back for a second. When the Lord in verse 37 was kind of talking about the second coming, this is a little bit more information about that. He does kind of go in between there. He talks about Newell K. Whitney and his store, and he's talking more about the buying up this land of Zion stuff.
Right.
But in verse 51, he says, "Wherefore, children." Now talking about during the millennium, I believe is what he's talking about here. Wherefore, children shall grow up until they become old, and old men shall die. But they shall not sleep in the dust. In other words, they're not going to get buried, but they shall be changed in the twinkling of an eye.
Mm-hmm.
Or I like to call it twinkled.
Twinkled.
Going to get twinkled. Okay. Which is an interesting concept. Basically moving from mortality to kind of a more immortal state instantly, and that's going to be an interesting concept there. Talking about the resurrection of the dead there, and then let's see, and then in verse 54, let me just pull this up for just a second here. Okay, so we'll go verse 54. Okay, so there's verse 51 we were talking about before. Verse 54, and until that hour, there will be foolish virgins among the wise. And at that hour cometh an entire separation of the righteous and the wicked. And in that day I will send mine angels to pluck out the wicked and cast them into unquenchable fire. That's an interesting, concept there. Foolish virgins. A little bit of background about that whole thing, which I learned from Donna Nielsen and a few other people in regard to the the parable of the 10 virgins.
Uh-huh.
And a little bit more background as far as Hebrew tradition might be in order here, and I'm just trying to make this quickly, but essentially in the Hebrew marriage tradition, these were mostly arranged marriages, and so that when you have the betrothed, when your parents both agree to the marriage, then they said that the young man would go off to build a house and to learn an occupation essentially that they could support the family with. The young woman would be working on her dowry and things that she needs to become a mother and a wife, and so in the marriage tradition that would take a number of months to happen. Typically 8 to 12 months is the typical amount of time that they would be separated from each other in preparation for this. But when the young man would be finished with the home and had learned and was efficient with his occupation, then he would come back into the town essentially, and it would be a big fanfare. They would say, okay, the marriage ceremony is happening. It's happening. They do it after midnight because they want the new marriage to start at the beginning of the dawn of a new day, the beginning of a new day.
Right.
And so they would they would gather the marriage ceremony together. Of course, most people would be sleeping about that time, but they would come in. They would be banging stuff and making some noise and that kind of thing. So, okay, those who are invited to the marriage ceremony, it's time to assemble yourselves because that's going to happen. The doors will shut right at midnight, and then we'll have the marriage ceremony so that this couple can be united forever. At the beginning of a new day. So it's it's the new start is kind of the emblematic aspect of that. So these foolish virgins basically are ones who were invited to the ceremony. They're the people. I mean, not everybody is invited to the ceremonies. Mostly the closest friends and family members and so forth that would be a part of that. And so these foolish virgins were part of the family, probably, or at least close friends of the bride or the groom or their families. And so it wasn't just anybody they're talking about here. They're talking about specifically those who were invited to the wedding, which in this particular case, I think the Lord's talking about the members of the church, his members. Okay. And he says, an hour cometh an entire separation of the righteous and the wicked. Of course, we know that the analogy is that the foolish virgins, they didn't have oil for their lamps. They had to go out and try to find some oil, while the other virgins who had taken the preparations were able to go into the marriage ceremony. And when the doors were closed, they were in, the others were out. And this is kind of what he's talking about, this purging, if you will, or the separation of the wicked from the righteous. And that's not talking about just people in the world. I think it's talking about people within the church.
Yeah.
The righteous and the wicked within the church are going to be separated and plucked out and cast into unquenchable fire. That doesn't sound like a happy place, but he's kind of giving them a warning about that's going to happen. And so I just wanted to let you know. I mean, that was happening in Joseph Smith's time, and it's happening in our time as well.
Yeah, well, it's a perennial issue. The wicked versus the righteous. It's throughout all the scriptures.
Yeah.
I could talk for a long time about that unquenchable fire, but we don't have time today.
Yeah, that would be good to get into that, but we're probably out of time here. So
let me just mention one last thing,
yes,
because you brought up this twinkling of an eye.
Yes, the twinkling. And
of course, that's another intertextual thing with 1 Corinthians. But let me read you how Jonathan Edwards talked about that.
You bet, that'd be awesome.
This is really cool. It's a nice link to it, because there it just says twinkling of an eye. What does that mean? He says they shall be changed in the twinkling of an eye.
Can I bring it up on your screen?
I could, yeah. Well, just read it for now.
Okay.
Maybe we'll post it later. They shall be changed in the twinkling of an eye into a state of glorious health, strength, perfection, activity, and incorruptibility. It shall perfectly heal of all trouble and sorrow, and shall forever banish such things. Now that is such an amazing choice of words there to me, because health and strength, okay, we're familiar with that. Perfection, yeah, but activity, isn't that awesome to think about? a state of glorious activity.
Kind of like that living water idea.
Yeah, it is. And incorruptibility. From then on, you can't be corrupted again. And in other words, you're impervious to the temptations of Satan and all that. So, that I just love the way he phrases that. And when I make that as a footnote to what the DNC says, it just expands the meaning, and it's so beautiful and exciting. Yeah. So that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about in this new book that's coming out, that I think for me it's profound, it's exciting, it's so many different things. And I just want to throw that one example because you brought it up. You didn't even know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, folks, I think that we have pretty much wrapped it up for this particular section. Okay. Jonathan, I want to thank you again for joining us and sharing some of the amazing insights that
Always
you bring
fun to be with you.
It's great stuff, and
especially when I don't have to come to Utah to do it.
Yeah, I tell you, the Zoom
Not that I have anything against Utah.
I should probably explain also. The last time we did one with Jonathan, I made a very bad mistake. I didn't hit the record button, so I apologize that the audio was terrible because it was just coming off of the speakers in my studio here instead of where you're. But we've been recording this, so hopefully the audio will be really good. And this time, and so we want to remind everybody to give us a thumbs up and a like here in the corner. Let's see where we're at, wherever there, over here probably, or over here, wherever it is on the screen. Anyway, so give us a thumbs up and a like, and tell your friends and your neighbors and ward members and so forth about this if you're enjoying the additional insights into this information. Hopefully you'll have a chance to we'll get this out a little bit earlier so you can actually use them when you have your ward. Hey, our ward is back to meeting in person for gospel doctrine as of last week. So that's nice to have that coming back again. So thanks, everybody. Go to bookofmormonevidence.org if you want to click on the podcast, or you can go directly to comefollowme2021.org. And Jonathan's got things there, and you can look at our YouTube channel as well. So we're getting some things worked out there, and we're excited about the coming things. So we have next week we'll have Ryan Nelson with us and doing some information on the next sections that are coming up here. Cool. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Have a good week. Bye bye.
Okay.